fighting waves of corrupted creatures, traveling through time, dealing with unhappy gods. This is Last Epoch, a game that I first discovered about 6 months ago while I was on a hunt for a fresh action RPG to invest some of my somewhat limited spare time. And I'm glad that I gave this one a try, as it turned out to be a fun and surprisingly challenging experience. My name is Jim, and this is the story of my journey in Last Epoch and my experience as a casual player. An experience that started as I first booted up the game and heard this epic song that would stay stuck in my head for months. And as I had previously played a rogue in my latest game, I wanted to try something different, hopefully something unique to Last Epoch, and after looking at the 3 mastery available for each of the classes, I decided to go with the Spellblade, a mage who apparently fights with swords. How can this not be cool? So after customizing it as much as I could, and by that I mean choosing a really original name, I began my adventure, jumping right into the not-so-impressive cinematic that introduced you to the world of Atia, a world governed by 4 gods, Magessa, Lagon, Hirot, and the last one, Raye, who turned out to be the evil brother who seeks to become the only ruler of this world, but a secret order called the Keepers, who swore to protect Atira's memory, were not going to let that happen, and we, a random traveler, were about to join their efforts. And although this is just a brief summary of the setting of the story, it did feel quite generic to me. But unlike some games, I had not bought it especially for the story, but rather to blindly hack and slash my way into hordes of monsters. And that led to my first step into this world, a world that feels like it's not sure if it wants to lean towards a cartoon or realistic style. Still, it does look quite good, and after a little tuning to get rid of the lag, which was not a great success until I get rid of camera shake, just saying, I was ready to follow this little dusty road and get into action. And let me tell you that the first encounters were great. The attacks and spells felt powerful and responsive, and I figured quite fast that it was not going to be a game where I stand still and spam buttons, as like you can see I was struggling to stay alive here during my second encounter at level 1. But I couldn't be happier to experience this, as I love games that gives me a challenge from the very beginning. It makes the leveling part so much more enjoyable, and this is usually the part where I spent most of my time anyway as a casual player compared to the endgame, so it is not a neglectable aspect for me. I managed to kill this annoying and powerful armored phoenix and pursue my journey on this somewhat narrow path until I reached level 3 and unlocked my first passive point. And those, as well as the skill specialization, are part of what I would consider the 2 main aspects of building a character in Last Epoch, apart from gears obviously, and are divided between your main and your mastery tree, and revolve around more general bonuses like defensive stuff, attributes point, resistances and such, and are also a way to unlock some of your skills like Glacier here at level 5. Standard action RPG stuff, I would say, though the game really shines when we start talking about skills and their specializations, as each one has a full tree to mess with, which can be shaped in many ways. It's a lot of fun and a lot of struggles too, and far from easy to master, at least from my perspective, but I've seen more complicated games. Now, needless to say that all those options combined opens up for a lot of build diversity, but for the moment I was still trying to figure out the basics of Last Epoch and picked up the only thing that seems to make sense: increasing damage. And followed by my new and handsome buddy Grail, who by the way is not a follower as there is no such thing in that game, I reached the first little town called the Keepers Camp. A lovely little base that felt much alive and friendly, with many NPCs chatting, strange creatures grazing on grass, as well as my clone, who unfortunately didn't stop by to say hello. And this is when I found the first waypoint and opened up the world map, which is kind of huge, and honestly beautifully crafted with a lot of details and plenty of areas to explore. But what got my attention is that the game is divided between 5 different eras, each of which is a variation of the same world through different ages in time. And maybe I'm impressed by small things, but this felt incredibly interesting. And from this moment I was eager to venture into those eras and see how different they have crafted this world, especially in the ancient era and the end of time. I mean, how intriguing is this place? But that would have to wait, as all I was able to do for the moment was to follow the quests and stand way too close to NPCs. Like, who can have a decent conversation that close? Anyway, like most games, we would need to prove our worth to these people and gain their trust before they would explain anything related to any sort of conflict happening in this world. And obviously, we were sent out of town to deal with a group of dangerous foes called Hosprix, and I followed that bloody path for a while, minding my own business until I found this. The Firestarter's Torch, my first unique drop, who not only boosted fire damage but reduced its mana cost, and getting this on a low-level character was definitely a game changer. This was so good that I kept this scepter from level 8 to 24, and decided, mostly because of it, to build my character around fire damage. And damn do I love when items make such a difference for a character in a game. It gives them a real purpose, and also triggered my curiosity for any upcoming unique drops. And soon I was able to test it against the first big boss of the game, the mighty Haruspeck Orion, and although it turned out to be an easy match, most probably due to my awesome new weapon, I still had to dodge and run around a lot, which showed me how dynamic fights could be in Last Epoch. And apparently, beating this bird was enough to prove my worth to the citizens, especially since I had just saved the important old man of the story, and at last I was allowed to learn about the Epoch, which is a sacred artifact composed of 3 shards that, if reunited, hold the power to travel through time, which explains this. And as expected, such a power could be dangerous in the wrong hands, speaking of the god Raya here, and starting from this point, the rest of the story basically revolved around protecting those shards while using their power to travel through the many ages of Atia ourselves, which is really cool. And that's what I did for the next couple of hours, going from one quest to another while spending way too much time reading and analyzing my skills and passives, and going through every piece of gear that dropped, searching for the smallest increase in power, just to be confused by half of what I was reading, as there is a lot of different affixes in Last Epoch. And speaking of items, it started to be a tedious task to manage, I would say around level 15, as the quantity of item was getting out of hand, and I was more than tired of hearing this.
I am not a man of many pockets.
So I rolled up my sleeves and learned how the in-game loot filter worked, and it changed my life. And was not too hard to learn, honestly. The only concern I had was to hide some items that would normally be an upgrade, but it needed to be filtered down for my own sanity. And only that speeded up the progression a lot, so that I reached the end of time in no time, and discovered my favorite place in this game, with these weird floating isles surrounded by those awesome mythical beasts. This is also where the mastery trees are unlocked, so my goal to become a spellblade was finally fulfilled, allowing me to use Flame Reeve, which completely annihilated everything in its path. I passed through a place called Lotus Halls, giving me a strong Diablo 3 vibe, met many NPCs with the same damn face, unlocked more and more idle space, and stepped into the last era still unexplored around level 27, that features some of the biggest chains I have ever seen, remnants of those holding this giant floating city in the ancient era, a place that cannot be explored, unfortunately. I then dropped my first key, which was for the Lightless Arbor dungeon, and completely forgot about it for some reason. And that is about the point where I started to mess up more with the Forge, which is the crafting system of Last Epoch, where each rarity of item, aside from uniques, have what is called forging potential. That allows you to either add an affix to an item or increase its tier. You can also use glyphs and runes to do a bunch of nice tweaks, like increasing the chance to avoid any forging potential loss, or a nice one that replaces an item with a unique or set item of the same type, which I personally use a lot on my second character. And the more I played with the Forge, the more I fell in love with this interesting yet simple crafting system that on one hand allows for a lot of freedom, but limits you due to the limited forging potential an item can have, which had the side effect of limiting the time I spent on this tab, and that was a good thing. So with all my newly upgraded items, I pursued my journey, unlocking the ability to dual wield at level 40, which just makes my character look so much better, and met for the first time the god Heorot and its flaming rival Raya in a somewhat deceptive fight. Yet the outcome of that battle changed our quest and sent our hero on a much more epic journey. That I won't spoil here, other than saying that it involves direct meeting with multiple gods. Now, although I was not technically super far into the game at this point, it was becoming much harder, and I started to be lost quite a bit when it came to build optimization. I felt that the amount of stats to keep in mind was incredibly overwhelming. The difference between things like endurance and endurance threshold, or ward and ward retention, and which of these was more important led to a point where my OP Flame Reeve Spellblade didn't feel so OP anymore. And to add to my overheating brain, life happened and I couldn't log into the game for 3 whole weeks due to summer vacation with the kids, so let me tell you that the moment I came back, I was lost. I was completely lost. And I didn't notice right away, but my character had been transferred to Legacy due to the beginning of a new league, so all my passives had been resetted. Nice. That's the moment where I took a deep breath, relaxed, and stopped trying to learn this game on my own. I jumped online to read and learn more about the mechanics and how to build a decent character, without using a pre-made build, of course. And I figured out that although this game offers a lot of different options, you kinda need to focus on some aspects to survive. And that new mentality alleviates a lot of complexity that I sort of imposed on myself, and I reached level 50 like a breeze, unlocking my last skill specialization slot, and did all of that while learning the new dodge mechanic that the league had brought. And in the next 5 hours, the game that for the moment was nice but a little linear completely changed as I unlocked most if not all the endgame content, starting with the factions system in the upper district of the Great Majelka, where a decision had to be made. Join the mysterious scholars of the Circle of Fortune and become a seeker of prophecy, enhancing my single-player experience with better item drop and a lot of other nice bonuses, or join the Merchants Guild and unlock trading via the bazaar and with other players to become a rich and snobbish lord. I obviously choose to become a scholar myself, as I already looked like one and was in for a solo experience anyway, and ended up spending a lot of time in the observatory where my destiny was waiting, written somewhere in the stars. Alongside that, finishing the story led directly into the Mullet of Fate, and no, it is not another side quest as I initially thought, it is actually the endgame of Last Epoch. A strange place depicting alternative timelines corrupted by the void that needed to be cleansed from evil in order to restore the power of the epoch. In other words, these are small instances, called echoes, filled with monsters and loot, and it didn't take long to realize that I had just unlocked the full potential of Last Epoch. And not only did I start to drop some really good stuff, but I was able to target specific item drop with the prophecies, and within the mullets too, giving me a sense of control over a game based on RNG. That's good. So I was no longer doing random content in hope to find something good, but efficiently or more efficiently spending my time towards small specific goals. And it is only after completing my first echo that I remembered about my key to the Lightless Arbor dungeon. You know, the one that I dropped at level 28? Well, it was time to go have a look at it, and in my great naivete, I chose the tier 2, recommended for level 65, although it was only 58. But I was confident, and monsters did feel much stronger in here, but they were still no match for my awesome melee mage. Even the last boss, this mountain beneath, only gave me a few bruises. The problem is that it was not the last boss, and I was completely obliterated by his Stoneheart. I was shocked, but far from desperate, as this boss here had just given me a challenge to overcome, and this is exactly what I think action RPG should be, as without a goal to pursue, small or big, these games become a brainless series of repetitive, bloody combats. So I accepted my defeat and went back to level up in the monoliths, enjoying it for many hours, refining my loot filter as more and more exalted gear dropped, found my first beer, tweaked my build many times trying to make it better, while jumping back into the Lightless Arbor dungeon each time I was dropping a key for it. But the outcome was always the same. Eventually, I completed my first timeline and was granted a blessing, another type of passive to farm that I was not aware of, and unlocked higher level monoliths to complete. You see the pattern here? That means more powerful monsters and more loot, once again requiring some loot filter adjustment. And after my 6th failed attempt at the Lightless Arbor dungeon, I made some major changes to my build, respecting a lot of my passives to gain more ward per second, sadly dropped my Huff and Sword for a shield to increase my defense, and at level 70, finally managed to destroy this big beating heart that had been mocking me for so long, and it felt incredibly satisfying. So much that I tried the 2 other dungeons right away, and they were a lot of fun as well, each having their own specific mechanics to deal with and a unique reward system at the end. And I must admit that the Temporal Sanctum was really the best one for me, requiring to switch between the Divine and Ruined era to complete. And the rewards of this one was unexpected, and adds once again another layer of progression to the game, allowing you to seal an affix from an exalted item to a unique item with some legendary potential. And if you understood nothing about what I just said, I felt more or less the same. But it makes me realize that I was far from finished with this game, and truly enjoyed the rest of my journey, jumping from dungeons to monoliths and into arenas while playing with the prophecies and constantly improving my spellblade. And at one point I decided to give the rogue a try, just to experience another class and see if it could increase the pace of the game a bit. My spellblade was strong, but kind of slow, honestly. My goal was basically to bring her at least into the monoliths, and I expected an easy walk in the park, as first, I already had a stash full of gears, second, I already knew the mechanics of the game, and third, I would completely skip the story and dialogues, which by itself should speed up the process by a lot. On top of that, faction points are shared between characters, which alleviates the burden to farm that up again. But apparently that was not enough, and maybe I was trying to rush the game too much, but I wasn't destroying everything in my path as I had expected. You see, the mechanics tied to the rogue are much different from the spellblade, going with dodge instead of ward for the main defense, for example, or having many options of damage over time build focused on bleed or poisoned, which I wasn't familiar with, and those new things felt like I was playing a new game. Same graphics, but a totally new experience that I had to learn from zero. But don't get me wrong, it was a lot of fun, just harder than expected. And all in all, it took me around 12 hours to start doing Monolith with her. So it had been quite fast compared to my first character, and she definitely ended up running way faster, making my spellblade look like a turtle missing a leg. I tested out many builds and changed my skills and specialization more often than I should, realizing that it is not the most efficient thing to do, as although you keep a minimum skill level when you reset them, it is a very long process to level it back up, making it harder to test fully optimized build. and I played with my 2 characters for a while, truly enjoying the game as it is, and brought my mage all the way up to level 74 before I decided that my time with Last Epoch had come to an end. I have discovered a great game, at least from my casual perspective. A game that respects my limited time and one that is always fun to log into even for short gaming sessions. And it was time to share this experience with you. And if you like this one, feel free to check my video on Diablo 4 and learn why I ended up quitting faster than I expected. And on that note, I wish you all a very good day and see you later in another world.